If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
Today's guest is an eventing specialist. He's won at 4-star level, so he's quite an eventing specialist. He's a rider, competitor, trainer and coach. And I'd like to introduce you to Craig Barrett. How are you today, Craig?
Very well, thank you, Glenys.
Great. Craig, we're going to start you off with a favourite quote. I'm sure you've got one for us today.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I sort of tend to keep it pretty simple, and I think it's a bit of a cliched one, but it's just never give up. You know, that's probably the one that rings true to me, you know, and it's a very difficult one to sort of stick to. But I think it is the bottom line of, you know, in the horse game, things get really difficult, you know, and that's just part of the course. Mm-hmm. And when the going gets tough, you just got to keep your head above water and, basically just never give up when the going gets really tough. And I think you probably should be giving up. So, that's probably my sort of most used. You know, when people go badly at an event, you know, the hardest part is to pick up and go again. You know, that's what actually makes you better. Yeah.
And I think when you go bad and then go well, the doing good is almost that much, you've come from such a long way down. It's almost better than being good, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, in the horse game, horses are such a leveller that there wouldn't be anybody at the top level who hasn't come from a very sort of scary place where they thought it was, you know, never going to happen. And so, anyone that's operating at the very highest level, I don't care whether you're talking Australia or worldwide, everyone at the top level will have come from that dark place where it's just you're not supposed to go on, you know, and that's just one of the first rules that you've got to learn to stick by.
Okay. Now, before I talk about that, which might have been your biggest challenge, I want to know about your start with horses, because we have quite a lot of people starting with horses that have come from horse families, but then others who just say, no, my parents weren't horsey at all. And I think you were coming from a background where you didn't have horsey parents, did you?
No, that's right. I didn't have horsey parents. I came from Sydney. We moved from Sydney when I was probably about 10 years old. We moved to Coffs Harbour and my parents bought 5 acres. It might have been 10, I can't remember. And, you know, they thought it would be a good idea if we got a pony. Never had anything to do with ponies. And we were quite lucky in that the pony that we bought belonged to a racehorse trainer, Ken Campbell, and he was a very good horseman, and he sold us a pony that was very quiet and suitable for the job, and his daughter actually sort of gave us our first riding lessons. And, you know, my first riding lesson was probably getting on it and getting it out of a yard and then promptly getting carted back to the feed shed on it. So we certainly didn't have a clue what we were doing, but for some reason we just kept on keeping on. You know, my mum used to take the picnic to the pony. My dad managed to get the horse on the float, and that's what we did.
Okay. And you had a float. Any trouble with loading? Any stories there? Because, you know, I've been to...
Not that I remember.
Yeah.
Not that I remember. But I think we were, as I said, we were very well looked after by Ken. If there was any sort of sniff of trouble, I think my dad was smart enough to know that he wouldn't try and do it himself because he had no idea what he was doing, and he'd either ring Ken or Ken had come and, you know, fix it for us, you know. So I think we were quite lucky. Our pony club was quite a good pony club in that, you know, it was a friendly mob and they were into eventing. And so they sort of did take us under their wing a bit. And we were quite well looked after. So I don't really have any sort of floating stories. I remember when I first started eventing, my first event was on this pony called Silver Bell. And I left the start box, and as she used to do repeatedly, I just went from the start box to the float. And that's where we stopped for a while until I could manage to coax her back past the start box to the first fence, and that's about usually where I finish my day. So that was the start to my eventing career. It wasn't a great one, but there was certainly some fun days.
Okay. And then you went on. Now, from school, did you go straight to Ryan's from school, or did you do something else before you started to do anything with horses? What happened there?
I first went to Heath and Rossie's when I was about 16. What happened was we were looking for another horse when I was about 15. I'd sort of outgrown the one I had. Mm-hmm. And I'd sort of seen in the horse magazine there was this auction on, and we went down and we had a look, and we had friends who lived at Nolkabar just near Cessnock, and we stayed with them, and I didn't really like any of the horses. None of them really went that well for me. There was probably nothing to do with how good the horses were, but I didn't think we'd ending up going to buy anything. Anyway, so this horse came in and Matt Ryan was riding it, and it was probably a 6 weeks old, 6 weeks broken in, mm-hmm. and it was jumping this grid and was jumping amazing, and for some reason my dad started to put his finger up, and he started bidding on this horse. I was like, what are you doing? And we hadn't ridden it. We hadn't really found anything about it. It was just mad. Anyway, of course, the hammer falls, and Dad's bought this horse for $1,750, and it was Matt Ryan riding it, and it was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Ryan, and Heath was obviously doing the auctioneering, or it was his auction. Yep. Anyway, so we got the horse carted home, and of course it was 6 weeks broken in, and it obviously wasn't probably going as well as we would hoped, and anyway, Dad got on to Matt, and I was supposed to go to Matt for work experience, and he was on his parents' sheep property at Coonabarabran. And anyway, it ended up that I couldn't go, and he said, here, look, ring my brother at Lochinvar. You might be able to go there. And so Dad did that, and sure enough, I was able to go for 2 weeks work experience there, and that was probably when I was in year 10, I think. Mm-hmm. And so that was it. I was hooked. And then as soon as I'd finished, I kept going back there in school holidays, and I ended up pretty much twisting Heath's arm and making him give me a job when I finished school. So, pretty much as soon as I finished school, I packed up and went straight down to the equestrian centre mm-hmm. at Lochinvar.
Oh, well, that was a good start. Some people go to school, have got a lot to do with horses, and then leave horses, do something else, still have horses on the side, but it sounds like you just went straight into horses. Was there ever any time you had any other work or any other job, or you've just always done horses?
Well, look, no, I've always just done horses, but of course there's obviously times when it's really difficult to make a living, and when I left the equestrian centre, I went to the UK for about 3 months, and I really didn't like that. It was too cold for me, and I just went, I'm just staying here. And I'd sort of ridden advanced when I'd left Australia, and all I could see was another 3 years of hard slog, in the English sort of weather, and before I'd actually get anywhere. So I went, I'm not doing this. So I came home, and then I worked for a year at a horse place just near Cessnock, and then that sort of finished. And then Prue and I obviously met at the equestrian centre, and we sort of ended up deciding we'd go out in business on our own. And when we went out in business on our own, obviously it was a fairly tough existence to start with. We used to sort of teach a couple of kids in Singleton in return for a rent of a shed, and it was sort of tough. And I ended up, it was Mark Fennell, and Joel Fennell's actually still riding two-star at the moment. And so when they were kids, he and his sister, we used to teach them in return for this shed that his parents owned, and had sort of, I think it had 10 or 15 acres and a couple of stables, and they were really good to us. But I actually was a stop-go man for a few times, with Mark Fennell and, that sort of stuff. So, but basically, no. Look, I've pretty much done horses and done whatever it takes to get the horses to cover the basis of our living. So, yeah.
I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, about your favourite quote, the never give up. But what sort of character traits or core skills do you think that people need to be in the horse industry? I mean, you've obviously got them, but you tell me if you were choosing someone.
I was lucky enough that when we were at Heath, we got a very good grounding in the classical art of horsemanship, I guess, and I think that sort of gets a little bit underestimated. I think I was able to understand the horse. I really enjoyed the horse, and it wasn't just necessarily a competition tool for me, and I think that's a lot of the problem that people have a bit these days. I think it's just a competition, and so I actually really enjoyed the training of the horse right from, breaking in right through the Grand Prix level in the dressage, and I think that's sort of what allowed me to exist when you've got a problem horse, so if there was a problem horse, it wasn't just about knocking it into line or anything like that. We would always try and understand why the horse was doing a particular thing, whether it was bucking or rearing or not going in the right direction or not jumping or whatever. So from a classical understanding of the horse, you can usually peel back the layers and work out why the horse actually doesn't want to do something. And I guess that's what allowed me to sort of ride horses that many others wouldn't even contemplate looking at. And that's probably what held me in good stead in those days of sort of riding everything and anything, you know. I remember we'd have horses come in on trucks that were 5 years old, and they'd never had a halter on. They'd just been run up into trucks with races, and, we had to try and get them off in the yards and catch them. And I had one horse that we got from one property. We called it Monty because I couldn't catch this thing, and it was in a race, and it was trying to jump out and kill us and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And the stock guys there go, look, we're going to lunch and we've got a book called Monty, that Monty Roberts wrote. We might bring that back. They were giving me grief. And I had to get this horse out of the race and onto a truck with just a ramp. And, it'd never been, white man hadn't seen it basically. Anyway, so, an hour and a half later, they couldn't believe it. I had this horse caught on the truck and I'd gone, They just couldn't believe their eyes. But, those were the sort of things that we used to do. I don't do that anymore. It's just way too dangerous. But that's what allowed me to survive. I was probably just good with the horses. These days, it's all about, you've got to be a really good people person. There's a lot of coaches out there now, and you've got to be able to sort of talk the talk. And I think that's a shame, but that's just the way it is. You've got to be able to network with a lot of people and stay in touch. I think it's a little different than it used to be. And that's probably what I'm not very good at. I'm better at dealing with the horses. But these days you do tend to have to be able to do both. You've got to be able to, keep a lot of people happy with owners and lessons and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And that's a very important part of being able to do it. I think if you live in Sydney these days and run a decent riding school, you'll make a good living. But you do need to be able to be a very good people person.
Yes. Okay. Now, you've talked about Heath and Rosie Ryan and the influence that they've had. Anyone else that you think has really influenced you and made you into the rider that you are today?
Yeah, look, I think just having the influence through Heath, we had access to a lot of the top riders in the country and the trainers in the country. So, and like I'm talking about Wayne and Vicky Roycroft, we had contacts with George Sanner, Chris Chugg, Rod Brown, Clemens Dirks used to come and do learn to teach days, and I remember we used to get taught by Anne Honor. We had a lot of access to the very, very top level of the sport. So I think not just probably singling out one, it would be Wayne and Vicky Roycroft, particularly Wayne. But, like even Vicky, she, I remember I had trouble with a horse, bidding it for the cross country. And she said, look, I'll come down on your day off and we'll find you a bit, and so I did that. I was probably an 18 or a 19-year-old kid, and Vicky Roycroft was offering me, assistance in how to make your horse go better, and so we try to do that the same these days. But it's all having access to that top level of the sport, which we were very lucky to have.
That's good. And what about horses who've influenced you? There's been quite a few, I'm sure, but
yeah. I guess my very first advanced horse that I didn't really have a lot of time with, I got lucky. Heath had 3 horses that he was supposed to ride at Melbourne 3-day event in 89, and he couldn't. He wasn't allowed to ride 3. And so somehow he talked the owners, a lovely couple from Kempsey, and I was from Coffs Harbour, and he talked them into letting me ride this horse, and it was Abdul. It was a black stallion, and I rode it at, I think it was Warren advanced 1-day event. Then I took it to Hawkesbury. I had 2 1-day events on him, and then I went around the 3-day event at Melbourne, and it was one of the hardest tracks that Australia had ever seen. And it was carnage, and this horse carted me round, and it was the horse that gave me confidence to be able to do that level. I thought I was just, a superstar sort of thing. But when you look back at it and you have a bit more sort of knowledge and know what's going on, the horse was a saint, The horse was brilliant. He carted me round there with me flapping at him and kicking at him and probably riding him too fast. But that's the horse that made me, was Abdul. And they were the 3 starts. I only rode him 3 times. That was it. But that's the horse that made me go. And then, I thought I could do it after that, That horse made me think it wasn't that hard. And if I hadn't have had that horse, I may not have ever made it, But that was the horse that made me. Apart from that, I've had a lot of advanced horses, but probably right up to recently when I won the 4-star in Adelaide. It's 5 years ago now, but that horse, Sandhills Brulaire, she wouldn't have been my most talented horse, but she was the hardest trier. She just tried in every phase, she tried the hardest. And that's probably my best win. At the same time, I had a horse called Wendell Jamie, and he was sort of probably more athletic, but just slightly a bit more difficult. And I did very well on him as well. And probably the other horse that I've still got at home, he's 25 now, the stallion Staccato. So when I was at the centre, I realised pretty quickly we weren't going to be able to afford to buy these horses if they were any good. You know, once they got to 4 years old or 5 years old and they'd start to show a bit of promise, they were worth a fair bit of money. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to afford to buy these. I'm going to have to breed them. And so when I was at the centre, my first 2 brood mares, I had 2 mares. One I got off Ken Campbell, who sold us the first pony. And that brood mare actually was a horse called Tuesday, and she's the mother of Panamera, who won Adelaide with Stewart. So that was the first brood mare I ever had. And then the other mare I had was a horse called Smiler, and she's the mother of Staccato, and he was the second foal that I ever bred. He's probably the most influential horse in my life, because there's not a horse that I don't have at home at the moment that I ride that won't have his blood in it somewhere, you know. And so all my horses have got his blood in them. And, like, he's produced 2 4-star winners. He just produced the winner of Wallaby Hill, 3-star. He's probably gone a little bit of an unsung hero. And he was a lovely horse to ride, but I was only young when I was training him, and he was pretty much the first warm blood that I'd got. Well, he was a half warm blood, half thoroughbred, but he was very much thrown to the warm blood. He's a bit slower. He was very careful. He didn't have a sort of a thoroughbred go button, and we had to sort of readdress our training methods just to keep him confident, keep him happy. And I probably didn't do as good a job as I would now. So he still won Goulburn CIC, won Sydney CIC, and he went round Adelaide when it was a 3-star, but he wasn't fast enough on the steeplechase, and had some time penalties. But, you know, he was a good competition horse, but I reckon he could have been better if I had had him now.
Okay.
But, those are probably the horses.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about the horses that you've had. Have you got one moment that you'd say, this is my proudest moment, or there's been a few, or it's ongoing?
Look, winning the 4-star at Adelaide would be probably my proudest moment. I think that's the biggest win that I've ever had and probably ever will have. So that would be the one moment if I was to choose one. Yep. Yeah, because we bred the horse, we bred that mare, and we sold it to probably my longest-serving owners who have been absolutely brilliant. So it was a really good experience, you know, to breed the horse, to train the horse, to have the horse owned by some really nice people, and, you know, it was just a great partnership.
What about your biggest challenge?
Well, look, I think the biggest challenge is always to get better. It's all very good to say it's all hard to stay in it, but the biggest challenge is always to get better. You can't sit still. You've got to always challenge yourself to keep getting better. How do I get better? What am I going to do today that makes me better at my next competition? You know, if you think you're finished, if you think you're good enough, you might as well hang up your boots, because all the young guys are going to go round you. You know, there's always things to learn with horses, always things to do better. And so I think that's the biggest challenge is how do you keep getting better? You know, I think we do have to keep challenging ourselves to get better and keep getting better at coaching the next generation. That's one of the big jobs that I sort of have at the moment, is just how do we make the next generation better than us? Because they can't just be as good as us. If they're only as good as us, they won't be any good. You know, they're going to have to be better. They're going to have to be better. They're going to be on better horses. We're going to have better competitions. You know, that's the goal. You know, that I see in our sport at the moment is one of our biggest challenges.
All right, thinking about the young people coming on, what's a common problem, common challenge that they've got when they're riding cross-country, and what would you say to them about fixing it?
I think for riding cross-country, look, it's a hard one. I think our sport has become city-centric, you know, and I think kids don't get out in the bush enough these days. They don't go up and down big slides and down narrow tracks, and, you know, they don't learn just to naturally, instinctively balance a horse. They're just there to do a competition, and, you know, you've got to make the time of that cross-country, whether you know that, you know, you're ready to do it or not. So I think the biggest challenges for the young people is to be classically trained and understand how you make the job for your horse as easy as you possibly can.
Okay.
That's the job for young riders, is they've got to be well trained. They can't just think they're going to have a good horse and go to the competition. And I'm not sure they do that, but all I'm saying is if a cross-country riding, you have to be able to balance your horse and understand the intricacies of cross-country riding. And it's not easy out there these days. Like when I started, we didn't have arrowheads. We had apexes, I suppose, but we didn't have all these narrow combinations where you'd had a lot of turning. You know, we didn't have any brush, not a lot of brush that I remember. everything was big, bold and straightforward. So as long as you're brave, on a brave horse, you're okay. You know, and I remember going to the World Championships in 1990, I think it was. We were there, Prue sort of hadn't quite made the team, but I went over anyway. The show jumping, I consisted of one stride double and one line of 5 strides. That, you know, that's where we've come from. And like, you know, even in there was basically 3 fences, I reckon, in the Wallaby Hill show jumping track that weren't related. So it's actually a much more difficult sport to get your head around as a young rider these days. Like, we used to hate having a stop or a run out in the old days. Well, now it's just part of the course, you know. You've almost got to go, well, it's not quite as bad, but, you know, like a run out for a young horse eventing is almost like having a rail show jumping. You know, it's going to happen at some point, and we've got to get used to that. All the jumps on the cross country now, the difficult ones, are designed to push you off them. And it's very difficult for a young rider to teach a horse to be honest on those accurate fences. So that's the challenge for the young riders.
Oh, hang on a sec. Let me interrupt to let people know about the horse industry qualifications at onlinehorsecollege.com. If you have a look at the flexible options, there's online theory, and the practical components can be completed by video or with a qualified expert in your area. That website again is onlinehorsecollege.com. Okay, thanks. Okay. So if you're training young riders and they're coming into challenging fences, what sort of tips are you going to give them? What are you going to work on?
Depends. Well, it depends on the horse, the rider, and the particular fence. But, you know, cross country these days, I tend to rely on line, pace. So they've got to get the right line to the jump. Then they've got to have the right pace that is suitable for that type of jump, and then they have to find the correct takeoff distance for that type of jump. They're the most important things these days, assuming that they have good position and they don't have to worry too much about their position. You know, we used to teach a lot about rhythm and all that sort of thing. Well, I tend to go away from that a little bit these days. It's much more about you've got to have the correct line, you've got to have the correct pace, and then we're looking for the correct takeoff distance for that type of fence. Whether it's a fence into water, you're going to have your horse a little deeper because, you know, there might be a drop involved. If it's a ditch and brush, it's got to be forward with pace and to the base of the jump, you know, and so they've got to be able to understand those 3 things and how they interact with each other.
Okay. Okay. No, good. Now, in all your riding, have you had time to do any reading? Is there a book there that's influenced you that you could recommend?
Look, I don't read a lot these days. I probably should read more, but I think for me, one of the biggest books that I read was George Morris's Hunter Seat Equitation. I think that gave me a real insight into the jumping, the horses, the exercises, the position of the riders, the philosophy behind that type of jumping. Previous to that, we were tending to be a bit more English sort of orientated in the jump training. I think we were influenced a bit more by Lucinda Green, and it's not that she had a dissimilar way of riding. She just used to gallop and let the horse back up and jump. But I think the Hunter Seat Equitation and George Morris's system is a really good way of a complete package for eventing riders to understand the jumping side of horses, whether it's cross country or show jumping. It's not particularly different.
Okay. All right. Craig, what are you looking forward to now? What does your future hold?
Oh, look, I think at the moment I'm training horses, I'm training riders, and we're just looking to continually improve the top level of our game. I think we have a little bit of a gap at the top level at the moment. Our top riders are very good, and I think they're very capable of cutting it at the international level. But there is a little bit of a gap then to the next generation, if you like. So I'm talking, you know, Stuart, Megan, Shane, Sonia, that level of rider, like they're fine, but then we come down underneath those, and I think the next generation, look, that's where we're trying to, you know, and I'm not coaching them all, obviously, but I have a few riders that are at that level that we keep looking to improve in small amounts, you know, over a period of time that slowly gets us up to be competitive with those guys. So, and I love the breeding, you know, I'm right into our breeding program. I think all our mares, you know, like we've basically got mares now that I could just about guarantee you're going to spit out 3-star horses if they find the right rider.
That's good.
So that's something that I like, and I'm really focused up on being able to sort of just keep breeding the horses that we need to sort of get to that international level.
Yep. Sounds like you got it all worked out. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure if we can do that, but,
well, that's
we're
good.
having a go.
I like talking to people who just say, well, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, keep improving, but much the same. Yeah. Now, if you can sum up your philosophy into a lesson today, that'd be great.
Look, I'm really interested in the riders. When I ride, I'm trying to help the horse do what I want it to do. And I think that's a big part of, it's just being able to understand and have a classical approach to the horses. I think it's got to be one that, when we're riding, we're trying to do things that allow the horse, understand why the horse does what it does, whether it be, is it balanced well enough? Does it move off my leg? Is that going to help me do what I would want to do? So I'm not really explaining myself very well. But in the horse game, we've still got to remember that it's all about the horse. And we do it because we love the horse. The horse is a very generous creature, and we have to sort of be able to look after it in a way that then produces a performance. And that's what happens when you get a brilliant performance. You have something that becomes or is greater than just the horse, the rider making a horse do it. The horse starts to want to do it on its own because you've taught it to do something. And that's when you get expression. So you want your horse to express itself in the way that you've trained it. And I think another George Morris quote says, good riders can make a horse do something. The great riders can make the horse want to do it itself. And that's when you get expression in your dressage test. You get ease in the jumping. It makes it look easy to gallop cross country because the horse starts to understand this is what I want to do. And I'll do this because I want to do it myself. And the rider almost becomes, a second part of the horse doing. Yes, we still guide the horse and ride the horse and all that sort of thing. But the horse that does anything easily is showing expression. It's showing that it's been well trained. And that's the goal of the rider or the trainer. It's not just to make the horse do it. It's to be able to do it in a way that the horse starts to express itself, and that's when people start to go, oh, did you see that? So it's quite an amazing, and that's where the horse starts to get people suck it in because that's what they're able to do.
Yes, a whole population of people, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. Craig, how can people contact you?
Look, we've got a website, sandhills.com, or our Facebook page is Sandhills. So all our information is on there. So if anyone wants to contact us, they can do it that way.
No worries at all. Is that .com or .com.au?
Probably .com.au.
Yeah. Look, whatever it is, I'll make sure that it goes on the website at horsechats.com/Craig Barrett. I'll check that out and just make sure we've got it. And your contact details. Yeah.
Great.
Craig, thanks very much for talking to us today. Been great talking to you.
Pleasure.
I've certainly enjoyed it. I'm sure that everyone else has as well. Okay, we'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Glennis. Bye.
Oh, wait, before you go, if you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.